Good evening, everyone. It's Tuesday, October 22nd, 2024. Welcome to the Committee of the Whole meeting at Council Chambers. I'm going to call our meeting to order at 6:31 p.m. We're going to start with a moment of silent reflection. But before we begin, I would like to highlight that October 20th to 26th marks Local Government Week. Every day, local governments work diligently to facilitate daily life, from managing essential services such as roads, water, wastewater services, and parks, to creating diverse culture, arts, and tourism experiences. I extend my sincerest gratitude to our local government professionals for their unwavering dedication and hard work. They play a vital role in shaping the character, priorities, and amenities of our community. And I also want to highlight a big thank you to my fellow council members for doing much the same for our community. So it is a week to recognize and appreciate and thank both the staff and council for the work that they do for advancing the best interests of the municipality of Port Hope. So with that, if you can join me in a moment of silent reflection, please. Thank you. Moving on to our land acknowledgement, the municipality of Port Hope exists on the lands of the Mississauga and Anishinaabe traditional territory covered by the Williams Treaties. We honor and recognize First Peoples as rights holders and stewards of the lands and waters on which we have the privilege to live, work, and play, including the Ganaruska Forest and River. We pay respect to elders past, present, and emerging. We commit to actions towards truth and reconciliation by recognizing the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, strengthening ties with First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples, especially those who make their home in Port Hope, and learning from Indigenous ways of knowing and being. We do so by recognizing the past and working towards a shared future. Moving on to the second item, are there any disclosures of pecuniary interest? I note that none were received ahead of tonight's meeting. Seeing none, moving on to item number 3, correspondence. 3.1 key takeaways from Deputy Mayor Holloway Wadhwani regarding Canadian Emergency Preparedness and Climate Adaptation Convention, September 10th to 11th, 2024. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Marilena. I know not much to say. It's all there. I just wanted to share this information because I thought it might be of interest to various members of the community and to staff. I have shared it directly with relevant staff as well. You know, I had the privilege of going on behalf of the municipality, and obviously I'm only one person. So I just think it's important that we try to circulate the information so we all have access to that and can benefit from it collectively.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Is there anything, 2 or 3 points that you would like to highlight?
Sure. I would say, you know, if you read through, one of the things that I think will jump out at you is this common thread about how, when it comes to emergency preparedness and emergency management, we need to start thinking broadly around who we work with and who's involved in that process, including diverse community partners and lay members of the community, neighbors as well. There's a lot of excellent examples of how that works and to the benefit of the whole community when you do face emergency situations, including increasing extreme weather events, which we know are already here and are likely coming our way more in the future. So I think that sort of approach to thinking about who are the people in the community who can be of service and support emergency management when we have that need is going to be a real critical piece of our thinking moving forward.
Thank you for that. And thank you for going on behalf of the municipality and bringing forward that information. Moving on to item number 4, items for consideration. We're going to start with item 4.1, Port Hope Public Library Board budget presentation. And I'll invite the representatives from the library board to make their presentation.
Good evening, Madam Mayor, members of council. It's a pleasure to be here today. My name is Margaret Scott. I'm the CEO at Port Hope Public Library. And also joining me here is the Library Board Chairperson, Bob Wallace. And I know I have a limited amount of time, so what I expect to do is just to add some additional comment to the slide deck that you have already received. "2024 accomplishments. The Library Board went through a process to update its strategic plan for the years 2024 to 2027. The board extended that plan by a year to provide a work plan for the incoming library board at the end of 2026 and beginning of 2027. Just to recap the areas of importance in that plan: to increase our impact, achieve operational excellence, and increase ability to adapt, extend our reach, and enhance participant engagement. The implementation of a new customer service role as recommended in the service delivery review. This was a key recommendation of that review. Our transition training for staff has begun, and we expect full implementation in January of 2025. We have a new collective agreement with our CUPE Local 749-01. Our expanded partnerships are listed there, but I did want to comment that the benefit of these partnerships is reflected in the programming that we do, the service development, and the use of library space. Increase in library membership was 5% over and above 2023. And in terms of actual round numbers, that's 800 new members, including children and adults. And lastly, the overall increase in circulation of all materials year to year, 9%, and that is equivalent to just over 9,000 unique items. Trends, challenges, and opportunities, and I'll begin with the trends. To develop effective relationships with municipal, provincial, and federal levels of government so that we can gather support in order to develop an effective service framework, and to create awareness in terms of the benefits and impact of the public library, specifically in building communities and strengthening social infrastructure. We note that partnerships and collaboration with other government services can result in efficient and accessible service delivery, a good investment of tax dollars. Challenges: the ability to manage emerging technologies into the service delivery model. So how do we best meet the demands of the community, educational facilities, as well as business and industry who all want access to and training for technology? The library challenges include space. Where do we put the devices and the equipment and the people? How do we provide regular updating, training both to the staff and to the public? And of course, how do we fund the purchase and ongoing service required for this equipment? And the last item under opportunities, service development at the Port Hope Community Hub. This is a strategic initiative for 2025. We will explore the feasibility and possibilities for community service partnerships, specifically with the new hub daycare service, which we understand may be in place in 2025. In terms of the library operation, we want to improve access to our collections, to the physical space, and to makerspace opportunities, as well as help increase greater community use of the facility and this site. Each of the specific goals that are listed here were included in the Library Board's presentation to Council in July of this year. The organizational impact of the new customer service role. We want to identify gaps or needs in the current revised organizational structure and potential areas for increased efficiency or collaboration with other municipal services. Community service for the Mary J. Benson branch in particular will cover a wide range of topics, including hours, services, collections, outreach, marketing, use of space. And this information will help direct the plans and decisions made by the Library Board. Information technology plan will include hardware, software, and service support, and that information and that document will help guide our operation and also budgets in the coming years. And last item, the multi-year financial strategy. We'll be looking at revenue generation opportunities and future planning for capital investments. The levy requirement is just over 1.1 million. Next page provides a summary, operating budget. And just to note that funding sources for the library are can be unpredictable and vary. Sometimes we get surprise and very pleasant donations, or we have opportunities to apply for grants and we're successful in receiving that money. So these are estimates based on past years of budgets. Increased financial requirement is significant. We see this as an investment in our greatest resource, our people, the staff. The library board has obligations under the CUPE collective agreement, and also there is some provision for wage grid progression for our non-union staff. So as I mentioned, the key recommendation from the service delivery review was to move to a single customer service position at the library. And that's what we are in the process of doing at the present time. And the premise is that we will provide a better level of service to the people coming through the door. So everyone who's in a customer service role will be doing the same job. And they will be positioned throughout the library, so anyone who comes into the library doesn't have to go to a certain area or to a certain floor. Anyone who they meet should be able to help them and assist them in whatever their needs might be on that particular visit. And we also will have a growing community, and the expectations, I think, of our service are changing. And so we will have staff actually integrated in the library in the sense that they will be roaming, is a term that we use, throughout the building. So they're on-the-spot service whenever it's required. With this new position, there are increased responsibilities, tasks, and expectations. Next slide, electronic resources. We have seen an increase in usage of our electronic resources and requests for additional resources. These items are not inexpensive. They are typically more expensive than print materials because there are licensing fees associated with them. So we do need, we were requesting some additional money to provide a greater range of electronic resources for the community. Port Hill Public Library belongs to several library consortia for purchase of materials. That includes print and electronic resources, as well as technology. So libraries across province pool our money to get the maximum bang for our buck. So it allows us to negotiate special discounts on materials and items, and also we have some leverage in terms of negotiating contracts for larger projects, such as our integrated library system. Increase in insurance dictated by market conditions. And the last one, the additional funds for building and janitorial and maintenance. There's a slight increase in the contract for janitorial service at both Mary J. Benson and Hub branches. And we also find now that there are items that require maintenance or repair, and that we have to go externally to find people who can do that work for us. One-time expenses from our development charges, $5,000 for a new collection of print materials for our youth. We have more teens occupying the library, and they're looking for different sorts of materials, which we don't have in the collection. So this would be a new collection of items for that age cohort. $2,000 from our reserve to complete required supplemental training for staff so that they're fully prepared and equipped for the new role of library services assistant. $10,000 from a reserve to support and assist in the rollout of our strategic priorities. And the last item, $8,000 from a reserve to update our website. We aren't reaching our full potential with respect to the technology there, and we'd like to have the upgrades that will allow us to be more adaptable. And then the carry forwards listed there. We plan to use these once the service direction and plans have been developed, reviewed, and approved by the library board. And that concludes my comments.
Thank you very much for that presentation. Just going to turn the lights back on. I'm going to turn it over to council members for any questions or comments of Margaret. Councillor Less.
Thanks, Margaret. Without seeing the line-by-line budget items, I know this is an overview. I find that I'd like to delve in to the individual line items to see what last year's budget was and this year's actuals. Okay, to see how closely they align, where the money was spent, where it shouldn't be spent. The other thing is the just lost my train of thought here. Overlapping of services with other departments. What services do you provide as a library that overlap with the services that Parks and Recreation provide? And you know, in this type of budget year, we can't have overlap. We're so tight, and so I'd like to look into that and have the smarter minds prevail on that one. Thank you.
I believe there was a line-by-line copy of the budget included in the package.
I have not looked at that yet.
Any other question? Or did you want to, Margaret, did you want to answer the second question about the overlapping of services?
I would like to have a little time just to think that over and discuss that with staff, but certainly can provide some information for you.
Councillor Adam?
Thank you. And thank you for the presentation. Wonderful. Quick question. How many members are part of the Port Hope Library?
I don't have an exact number, but roughly 13,000
okay.
Within the municipality of Port Hope.
The only reason why I asked that is because with the increase of 5% and be 800 new members, is that specific to Port Hope residents? Are these Port Hope residents that are members, or are they outside of the Port Hope?
Primarily residents of Port Hope. We do have a non-user card or a membership for those who wish to purchase a membership card to use at Port Hope Public Library.
Okay. And do you mind one more? Okay. And I have another question. It's about the hub. So you're doing a review on the hub and about different services. So over the last 2 years, has there been any changes with the hub? Has there been an increase of visitors per week?
I can provide those statistics for you, Councillor Pearson. It varies, depending on what's happening. We are doing more programming at the hub, and that brings in more people. Those people don't always come back on a regular basis, but they are coming for a specific purpose, something that the library is providing there. We also have the Library of Things is located at the hub too. So we want to do some more marketing of that collection as well. Those are the items that you don't necessarily have at home and you want one-time use. So bread makers, for instance, we have large size games that people can use outside. So it's a wide range of things that we have. Yeah.
So have you noticed a change in the last 2 years as you've been changing the things over there to actually see that increase? I'm just wondering what the next year of changes is going to be. Would it be something similar, or we're going to be making enough of a change that, you know, it increases the traffic flow? That's all.
Well, one of the things that we will be introducing in 2025 is a toddler program at the hub. We've had huge success at Mary J. Benson with that. That's a new program, just a few months old, actually. So the planning and programming staff think that it might be worthwhile, because early on, for those of you who are familiar with that program, they did have an ongoing program at the hub, and it was quite successful, actually. There were quite a number of children and family members that came. That no longer happens at that branch, but so that's an opportunity to pick up that same program and deliver it to the rural community. If I could add, since you've asked, so we have tried. We do have once a month. We have a craft night at the hub that brings out quite a number of people. We also are providing community access. We provide programming for their clients. They come once a month to the hub, and that seems to be quite successful for everyone. And we've just recently initiated a hub club, and so it's a drop-in once a month on Tuesday nights, which is the night we're open at the hub, and people come and they talk about books, they do puzzles. The idea is that they're connecting, and there's a place for them to go and to meet people. So that's relatively new for us as well.
Right, and I have Councillor Todd, and then I have the Deputy Mayor.
Right, thank you very much, and thank you for the presentation. Margaret, as you know, like as we get into budgets, money's going to be tight, and I think this is going to be a hard year for all of us, and I think future years are also going to be hard. So we're going to have to look at all the budgets, and I think we're in a period now where it's not always going to be about more; it's going to be about different. And so what can we do and be more creative? One of the things there's a thread that came up in your presentation I just wanted to tug on a little bit. And that was when you're talking about revenue streams and you're looking at different ways of raising income and so on. And I'm just curious, has the board ever discussed things like endowment funds and looking that way to be able to create an endowment fund program?
Certainly, there has been some discussion about developing some strategies, and the finance committee of the board will be meeting and looking at developing a strategy, and within that would be options for additional revenue, including endowments. Yes. And just on that note, we do receive donations throughout the year, and they range in size, of course. But that's something we don't market very well, to be quite honest. We could, I'm sure there would be more donations that do come in if we were a little more aware of that opportunity.
Yeah, that was actually the thread that caught my eye. It's like, okay, yeah, maybe there's, if you can build that out into an endowment fund, then that actually could, especially because so many people are endeared to the library. So when they're doing estate planning, being able to leave endowments to the library, I think could be a really important opportunity.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Great point. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. Just thinking about looking at the detailed budget that you shared with us for today's meeting, and thinking back, I think, to some of our discussions around the library budget and the requested increase the last time we were going through this process. I know that one of the things that definitely stood out for all of us is when we look at the bottom line and the overall percentage increase between last year and what you're proposing for 2025. We had that same stumble when it came to the library's budget last year. And so I just wanted to add my 2 cents and sort of suggest, I really hope that we as a council keep in mind that there's, I think a bit of a logical fallacy in assuming that we can apply the same percentage increase across the board, given the difference in size between different departments. So what seems like a big percentage increase for a small budget like the libraries is actually a relatively small dollar amount. And, just because a budget department is small doesn't mean staff cost less because they work in that small department. Doesn't mean software costs less because it's being purchased by a small department. And we need to be careful of falling into a trap of continuing to allow bigger budgets to increase by more and more dollar amounts and creating a greater divide between our investments across diverse municipal priorities. So that's sort of the thinking that I have brought to this, which is not to say that we shouldn't scrutinize the budget, but just in that context that the requested increase that you've brought forward of $135,000, if applied to the operating budget of Works and Engineering, would be a mere 3%. As opposed to the close to 14 or over 13 that it is on your small budget. So with that in mind, I think what we should be doing when we're conscious of this is a tight year, we should be looking more at the validity of what's being requested as opposed to taking a blanket approach across the board. And so my question is to delve into what is really accounting for the the increase is the change in staffing costs. And I know there's two things at play. One is the grid level increase that we approved at this council table earlier in the year. I would like to understand how many staff does that apply to? And then the other is the change in the CUPE contracts. And if you could help us understand a little bit the nature of that increase and what are we talking about in terms of the increase in salary for those many part-time staff at the library, just so we have that context of what that represents.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. And I'm just going to jump in for a second and say, just as much as I'm going to just compare this to Police Services Board. We actually never ask Police Services Board when we're asking them to cut down on any kind of expenditures for an accountability of their line by line items, because that's not in our wheelhouse. It's actually the library board or the police board that decide what is important in terms of their expenditures and how they come up with their budget. So I want to just remind council that that's not really in our lane, but I do appreciate what you're saying about different size entities and departments, which, you know, we can apply that thinking to so many things across the municipality. So just want to make sure that we're cautioned around how much we're asking for line by line explanation, because I really don't think that's our laneway.
I can
Councillor
provide
Les?
some information to your questions, but I think the best approach might be to put it in writing and send it to all members of council. Of course.
Councillor Les, did you want to?
You know, I keep, you don't take percentages to the bank, and we have to talk in hard dollar terms. So irregardless of what department it is, we have to boil down the dollars. What is a reasonable amount of money that could be spent this year versus other years on different line items? And I've gone through them, and the, you know, the books and the e-books and everything. You know, I know they're an essential part, but you know, we go from X amount of actual to Y amount of ask for budget, and it's a significant increase in all these areas in terms of dollars. So I think you got to have a real hard look and say, you know, we're in a budget year that is really ugly, and you're not, unfortunately, you or no other department is going to get for everything you ask for.
I'm going to turn the chair over now to Councillor Clare for a minute.
Okay. I will now chair. I assume you have something you would like to say, Mayor Elena?
Yeah. I actually have one other question before I put a motion forward, and just to understand what has been sort of the, would you be able to supply us with a 5-year trend on how much the use of the library has increased over years in terms of the actual users? So earlier in the presentation, you said 5% is the increase in the last year in terms of, can you just explain that out a little bit more, just so that we're really clear on that?
Yeah, of course. And that particular statistic reflects the number of new registrations, so new library cards that were issued to people who don't have or never have had a Port Public Library card.
Okay, that's what I assume. Thank you for that. So then I'd like to put a motion on the table today, and it's really in the spirit of, I think, what some of you have all alluded to, and this is that we are in an impossibly difficult budget year. There are so many pressures that are faced by this municipality, and in terms of the kinds of really difficult decisions that we're going to need to make. And it's not a reflection on whether we value something more or less, but really about trying to find a way to continue to make Port Hope a viable and affordable place to live. And I can certainly share some of the experiences that I've had, and maybe council would like to also reflect in terms of the budget survey and talking to folks in this community. And one of the most consistent things we hear is how incredibly expensive and hard it is to make ends meet in this community. And so I'm coming to this motion with the spirit of equity around what we're expecting our staff to do in terms of some of the really difficult budget decisions across many different departments. It's not going to be limited to library. It's not going to be limited to police. It's going to really involve a joint effort to really make some difficult decisions. And so with that spirit and expectation of how important it is for us to make some responsible decisions this year, I'd like to put a motion forward to accept the presentation for information as per the agenda, but also to that the increase to the Port Hope Public Library budget be capped at 5%. And I'm that is my motion.
Thank you, Marilena. Is there a seconder for this motion? Seconded by Councillor Adam. Would any council members like to speak to the motion? Seeing none, I'll add. I would like to before we move to a vote. Again, I think I've already, expressed my perspective on that. I think an arbitrary percentage is just that. It's arbitrary, and I understand we need to tighten our belts, but I would rather see us do that on the basis of where are we best investing our money, as opposed to a blanket, percentage that we impose on every budget. Also keeping in mind that in a time when it's hard to make ends meet, the library is one of our few remaining services that is free and accessible to all, and meeting the needs of the most vulnerable who are struggling most from a financial perspective in our community. So I think that also should be on our minds when we think about which budgets we're going to restrict. Would anybody else like to add any thoughts before we call a vote? Councillor Todd.
Thank you. And I completely appreciate where the mayor is coming from, because I think we do have to look at each budget. And this is going to be, to say the least, a belt tightening year. The number is the only thing. I'm not sure how to reconcile the number, whether 5 is the right number, 4 is the right number, 6 is the right number. I don't know the answer to that. And I'm curious whether or not you'd be interested in referring it back to the library board to have them come back with a smaller number, or is 5 the fix? I'm just curious in discussion on that.
Marilena?
Well, actually, that's a good question. I'm also wondering at this point whether or not I might be able to ask the CAO for any comments in terms of how we may be moving forward with budgets, or whether this is a reasonable number to be looking at, because it is in the spirit of, and again, I think that I agree that you have to pick some number somewhere and try to work with that. Perhaps with my motion, I'm trying to signal my real concern with the overall budget, and really being very serious about the fact that we all need to sort of tighten it up to come in with a budget that's going to be realistic, understanding that there's so many valuable services, there's so many valuable things in our community. The overlap of services was one that I have a question mark about. Your point about looking for external funding, whether or not the library could work with our grant facilitator to find additional funds to offset some of those funding shortfalls. Just getting a little bit more creative so that we can deliver a budget that's actually realistic for the community. So for as much as we appreciate the free services that the library provides, and even to the most vulnerable in our community, if the most vulnerable and families can't afford to live in this community, then that's kind of a moot point as well.
We'll go to Councillor Les first.
Yeah, I know you brought up not a comparison, but you brought up the police board. The library staffing and benefit cost line is about 50% of their total budget, whereas the police the labor portion is 90%. So, you know, some have more leeway in other operating expenses than others. Just want to make that point.
Councillor Todd?
Yeah, I just wanted to say to the mayor, because I agree with everything, the spirit of everything you're saying, and I'm with you on all of it. I think we need to be very creative, and I think all of us, as we go through the budgets process, are going to have to send that same message, right? And so, you know, Margaret and Bob and to the team, it really is about what's the creative problem solving in all this right now. The only thing I'm stuck on is that the right number, or is it not the right? And I don't know how to quantify that.
Marilena?
So if for a man of metrics, I'm disappointed in you, Todd. But I mean, quite seriously, can we give a range? Can we give some kind of feedback to say that this is outside of the scope of what might be comfortable? But I think we need to give some guideposts here. What are the guardrails that we might be, you know, comfortable with? I'm happy to make a friendly amendment, but you know, you are a man of metrics, so.
Councillor Adam?
Thank you. So I really appreciate this, and I appreciate the maybe capping it off at 5%, as we all do know that this is a very difficult year, as many years are, and especially when it comes to these budgets are compounding. So when you're increasing by 9% one year and 8% the next year, they're adding up in a hurry. The one thing that, if it's okay with you, that I wouldn't mind adding to that is just to see what services that we would lose, the community would lose, if it did get dropped down to that, so that we can make that educated decision with whatever the library tells us that these wouldn't be there with the reduced budget. The impact.
So, Councillor Todd, I'm looking at you because it sounded like you were sort of leaning towards a friendly amendment. Are you finished with that line of thinking?
Yeah, I think we're actually coming into a place, because I agree with Councillor Adam that, you know, I'm fine with choose a number. If we choose a number arbitrarily, we don't know what the impact's going to be. And to the mayor's point, maybe there is a range to it to say this is the guideline to it, because I would like to see what comes back. So net, I believe the budget needs to be relooked at. I think we need to be able to pull back as much as possible, and I think we do need to be able to see from the library, this is what we think we can do, and this is going to be the impact. And I don't know if that means we go through another presentation and it comes back again, so we have another look. But I agree with all of the things that are being said. I think what I'm stumbling over is the process by which we put it into play, and open to ideas, because what my biggest fear, and I'm not afraid of the number. If it's 5%, if the council decides 5% is the number, what I would like to see is what does that translate into if it does that.
Marilena?
So I actually wonder if maybe what a good process might be, and I really appreciate us being able to have these presentations ahead of our budget deliberations so that we can think about this. I wonder if we could ask for 3 separate percentage points, and for that to get a sense of what could be delivered at 5% and at 7% and at 9%, and see those comparisons and see what, and that gives us a more fulsome picture.
Councillor Adam, as the
So Madam Chair, currently there is a motion that is on the floor that was moved by Mayor Olana and seconded by Councillor Pearson, and that states that that this item be received for information and that the increase be capped at 5%. So in this case, because the change that we are requesting is quite significant in nature, a further amendment motion would need to be put on the floor that outlines what that change to Mayor Olana's amendment motion or to Mayor Olana's motion is. So as long as I can get some specific wording, then I'm happy to assist with that as well.
So, yeah, that's a good question. Is it possible for the mover and seconder to just withdraw the motion and start fresh, or yeah? So then my question is going to go first then to you, Mayor Alana. It sounds like you're sort of making a friendly amendment to your own motion, but would you prefer to withdraw and restate a new motion?
Let's withdraw. Let's start again. Let's get this as quickly as possible through the
Okay.
intent.
Okay, so that motion has been withdrawn from consideration. I'll now go back to you, Mayor Alana, to put your new motion, amended motion on the table.
Okay, I'm actually just looking a little bit to my seconder, who's maybe not agreeing with the points. 3, 5, and 7.
So you're saying that 3, 7, and 3, 5, and 7? I think a minute ago it was 5, 7, and 9.
That was my suggestion, but Councillor, I think what this discussion is really highlighting is the fact that we're taking really seriously our budget constraints. So I will, though, stick with my original intention of the amended motion, which is that we receive this for information and that we would like to see new information around the Port Hope Public Library budget at an increase of 5%, 7%, and 9%, with some further information about what would be available for delivery under those budgetary possibilities and or constraints, or what would be included in those 3 amounts. No, that would not work.
So I see our clerk is furiously typing to try to frame that into a motion. No, this is probably kind of out of order. But are we maybe being a little bit pedantic here? Like, we're talking about the library board and the director of the library. I think our sentiment as a council has been clear. Could we not also just consider sending it back to say, we're not comfortable with the proposed increase in the context of the larger budget constraints, and we would like you to come back with an amended proposal that reflects our current thinking? Mayor Alana?
No, I don't, because I think that what we want is as much precision in our budget deliberation day, because we don't want to have this process happen, and we're going to have to get through a lot of material that day. And I think the more information we have and the more precise information we have at different points will allow us to make the best decisions in that moment.
Okay. Do we have a motion? That would be helpful.
So that the Port Hope Public Library Board presentation be received for information, and that the Port Hope Public Library budget be provided with a cap of 5%, 7%, and 9%, and that the comparison between those budget numbers be provided for council consideration.
Yeah. Okay, you're comfortable with that? Okay, is there a seconder for the revised motion? Councillor Adam. Any further discussion by council? Okay, then I'll call the vote. All in favor? And I'll pass the chair back to the mayor.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Moving on to 4.2, report FS 1724, reconsideration of rural LLRW, urban LLRW, and hydro reserve funds use in the 2025 budget. Does staff have anything further that they would like to add before we consider this report?
Thank you. I'd be happy to speak to the report. So many of you may recall, as we went through last year's budget, through our discussions, talking about, our urban LRW fund, or rural LRW fund, or hydro fund. And wanting to have a discussion about that. So Hence, why we have this as part of our budget roadmap this year, wanting to create time and space before we're at our final, budget day to be able to have some context and some discussion around these three, our largest three reserve funds. Okay, so that's the reason, because last year I didn't have, a report. This isn't an annual report. This is really coming based on the feedback and the discussion that we had last year at our budget, with the thought of having these in advance building up to our budget. I'm going to, because I am talking about three different reserves, I'm going to kind of speak to each of them individually, just to try and avoid, and I don't want to move from one to the next and then back, just for some clarity. So we have, for the rural LLRW reserve, in the past 10 years, we have utilized almost $2 million to directly, that was been directly applied to reduce the rural tax levy. This is in accordance with the standing resolution of council that 80% of the prior year net earnings be applied to reduce levy. And then what happens is that remaining 20% of the net earnings stays and remains in that reserve, because over time, that $10 million will have less and less of an impact as our community grows. And so that has been consistently applied, as I mentioned, over the past 10 years. Also note that there's been no other use of the funds during that period. And the plan, especially given that we have standing direction, the plan going into 2025 is to continue to use 80% of the prior year's net earnings to reduce the rural tax levy. So no change there, and a little bit of context. We've had very good consistency over, say, the past 10 years. Not seeing anything jumping out immediately. I'm going to move. Can I move on to the urban, or?
Do you want to take questions now?
It's really up to the.
Hi, Councillor Less. Yeah, I can. I was just going to let. I mean, it's up to council whether or not. Would you like to take questions in this part or hear the entire presentation? I'm assuming you have a question.
Well, this is specifically to the
Okay.
rural.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Okay. So we don't get too mired in future numbers. The rough number of the LLRW fund for the urban area is about $300,000 a year, based on the 10 million. Of that, 80% is allocated to homeowners and taxpayers. So that would be 240,000. The OPP report indicates that their base charges are based on the number of households in the rural area, and that number is 1,692. So I have to take that as a fact. So if you divided the 240,000 by 1,692, theoretically a taxpayer should get $141. The allocation last year was $67, not 141 per household, meaning there is about 110,000 unaccounted for that went to taxpayers that weren't part of the household community, but either utilities or larger landowners or businesses. So what I would like to suggest, that instead of giving this $67, which is not even a cup of coffee every couple of days to residents, that we take the 240,000, put it to a rural specific initiative. And the one that comes to mind quickest is Canton. There is a bit of a shortfall in funding to open daycare for 50 kids at Canton. So we could use a portion of this money to get over the top and open up the daycare there, much as we're opening up daycare here on Mill Street for the urban residents. The other part is that if we have any excess or excess in years going on, we have a dire need for day camp. And a day camp facility in Canton would make a lot of sense. and we could model it after what they did in Coburg at the YMCA with an open air structure. So I say it's specific to the residents that can use this, as opposed to piecing it out to larger taxpayers who really don't need the money. And that was my point.
I'm going to turn it over to the director and to the CAO, but I just want to note the point about the shortfall in childcare. We actually don't know what the shortfall is. We don't have all the final numbers, nor has there been an opportunity to address that shortfall at the county council, which has been funding the childcare spots for both the rural and urban areas of Port Hope. So just to clarify in terms of funding streams for that. But Director Baxter?
So just a few points of clarification. So the $67, $66 that you're referring to, I just want to note that's for the average, which is the average among the urban and rural areas. In the rural area, if we look just at the rural area, that impact is actually $108. So just so we're all on the same understanding, since we're talking just the rural area, that is actually $108. There is a larger impact on a per property basis, just because the overall weighted assessment base in the rural area is less, and fairly similar amount of net earnings. Okay. So for context, $108 for the typical, I should say, for the typical residential, right? So that's specific on the residential side for the typical residential homeowner. To the second point, Councillor Andrews is correct in that we could take the funds and directly apply them to, say, a rural project. Right? If we were to do that, right, then effectively we're taking rural money, and that rural project is being funded 100% by the rural area. If we take that same project included as part of the tax levy, the rural area collectively is only paying 28% of that same amount raised. So it can be done. It is an option and an alternative that should be considered. Looking at the portion that the rural area, if we're looking to get more bang for the buck, say, from the rural area, we would be better to add that into the overall levy, pay for it as a community, and in that way, the rural area would pay 28%, because that is their share of the weighted assessment, which is how taxes are allocated. I understand Councillor Andrews' comment in terms of trying to get specific to the residential, right? And by far, our weighted assessment, our tax base is residential, but there certainly is, other organizations in there, in terms of, industrial, hydro, other properties. But it is important to remember that whenever we have a reduction, that some of those other properties, right, high value property owners, industrial, other government ones, they share in that reduction and that savings. The same way when we add a project or anything to the levy, they are also the ones paying, right, in that same part. So that is just something I think to keep in mind, because I do understand the point, but there's also an equity in terms of the whole tax process and setup. So
I'm just going to turn it over to the CAO and then back to the Deputy Mayor.
There we go. Thank you, Director Baxter. That was a fantastic explanation. But just to circle back on the intent of this evening's report in regards to really trying to focus the conversation. I know that staff prepared a report that included the LLRW funds as an update intentionally, but ultimately if we're going to go into the discussion about how we're going to be utilizing or potentially considering the utilization of the rural LLRW funds, I caution council in regards to not going too far down that road, as it could have rippling effects in regards to into the community that is already greatly concerned in regards to how the LLRW funds was created, implemented, continues to be allocated. There's lots of community interest on this, and if we were to decide, or you were to decide as a council to provide direction to us to open up that conversation, I suggest that it would take immense community engagement and discussion to determine how the rural community, how our Ward 2 residents would appreciate that LLRW fund being spent and have a significant voice in determining exactly what that would be. So I'm just cautioning on how this conversation is interpreted and how it could be perceived by the members of the Ward 2 public.
Okay, I've got Deputy Mayor and then Councillor Lass.
My question actually sort of does relate to this, and I appreciate your comments, CAO Candace, very helpful. And I was going to say, I think having this as pulled out as part of the budget roadmap is fantastic, because this is an area where we get a lot of questions. I had the pleasure of spending some time with a large group of community members in Canton, thanks to a meeting organized by Councillor Darrell, and this was a big piece of that conversation. And one of the questions that did come out in that meeting that we said we would follow up on, I'm getting the chance to ask it in public tonight, which is when that process occurred that culminated in 2018 with the resolution by council that is now that standing direction, I'd be interested in understanding sort of what that process looked like from a rural engagement perspective, if you're able to speak to that. But also, was there any consideration at that time for that direction to be reviewed at some point in the future? And I think that's something that the community is interested in knowing, whether they get a chance to revisit that decision as the community shifts and as the budget pressures and taxes have increased dramatically. And so that's a question we said that we would ask and try to bring back, and even better that it'll be recorded and answered publicly.
Director Baxter.
Yeah, so certainly I don't recall there being any specific community engagement on that. That being said, there had been significant community engagement, organized or otherwise, for several years leading up to that period of time. So I can't speak for, I believe it was the mayor at the time who brought the motion forward, and I can't speak, for him. I don't recall there being anything in the resolution for a periodic, like a set review. I would anticipate that consistency, based on what had been heard from the residents, was probably more of the concern than making sure that it came up and was reviewed on a regular basis.
Thank you. Are you okay?
I have another comment, but I'll wait till the end.
Okay. If I see no other comments, if you would like to just proceed with the rest of the presentation.
Certainly. So now I will move on to the urban LLRW funds. Similarly, there's been $1.82 million has been applied over that same 10-year time period. So I will context 2015 through 2024. $1.82 million has been applied to directly reduce the urban tax levy. And then also $295,000 was committed as initial funding for the downtown revitalization community improvement plan during that same period of time. So while there is no standing direction on the use of the urban LRW funds, in most years, it has been a similar process of the 80% of the prior year net earnings that has been applied. And most notably, the year in which we took the 1 year, I believe they put all of the money towards the CIP, and the following year, I believe it was 50,000, and then the rest towards levy. But generally, at least for the past 5 years, we've been consistent on that on that front. And I think that consistency is helpful. So looping back around then, so plan at this point, I'm not suggesting any changes to that. As I've said, I think that consistency is helpful in an area that, you know, can we hear about confusion on, is to continue using the 80% of the urban LRW funds to directly reduce the urban area levy. I'll pause briefly in case there's anything specific on the urban LRW, because then the real discussion is around the hydro.
I'm going to jump in and then ask Councillor Les has his hand up. It's just something that I'm wondering actually for both of those reserve funds. How often do we actually visit where they're sitting in terms of the investment itself? Is there any value in looking at, can we be doing better or more in terms of the interest that's generated from those funds? Just wondering, how often do we actually review how we're performing compared to, other investment, maybe firms, and what percentages are we yielding over time, and are they in fact competitive? Are they the median? Are they lower? Are they higher? How are we performing in terms of those both those investments?
Certainly. So we do have an active investment advisor, just for everyone's general awareness. It's not myself picking, what we're going to invest in. I do know from talking to other municipalities, there is a range from some that just have their money sitting in a bank account, some that have it invested, but it's in GICs, typically, earning lesser increase. Our investments, we have some short-term, treasury GIC type of. Most of it is meant to be in a laddered bond portfolio, meaning that you have different investments that are maturing at different points in time. So we don't have $10 million sitting in one, bond. We have, maybe 7 different ones, each expiring or maturing, I should say, at a different point in time. And then some shorter term, more cash-like investments, just so that we're not just sitting in with cash. So that's the general, realm of it. There is now legislation in place where called Prudent Investor, where, we could put other things, in place to be able to potentially be, take on a bit more risk, which might provide, more reward over time. So there are other options. We have been resource-wise, limited in the amount of resources that we can look and put into, going and looking at other investment options. We had looked at some with our investment advisor of potentially, but it involved more pooling of a fund to get to a threshold that would enable us to look at some other investment avenues. One of the challenges with that then is looking at from just an investment standpoint, even though we could keep the reserve separate, was then the consideration of taking, the hydro funds and the urban LRW funds and the rural LRW funds and general funds and putting them all into one investment account, which, might be, there could be some challenges for optically. We just haven't had the time to sit and really focus and go through and update on that front. We do have conversations with our advisor, and there was periods of time where we didn't want to lock into, multi-year bonds at low rates, and so they've been good at saying, no, we're going to earn a little bit less right now, but let's not lock in low, wait a little bit of this out. And then as the bond market was turning around, we were investing. So we are seeing some of those returns improving now. I haven't done an analysis of, what other municipalities, have earned or not in terms of their investments.
One really quick follow-up. How long have we had the same investment advisor?
We've had the same investment. I don't know the full answer to that, but we've had the same investment advisor since I've been with the municipality.
It's for the public. Can you just note how long that is, please?
So that at least since before 2013.
With that, Councillor Les,
That was my question, but I have other questions.
you want to follow up now with some other questions? Okay.
All right. So third topic is the hydro reserve funds. So actually, sorry, before I move on to that, I will just finish just for the benefit of anyone who hasn't read the report, but have identified within the report that just verifying that both of those funds started at $10 million. That full $10 million is still there with some additional funds, the rural area being 10.6 million and the urban one being $11.4 million. So I want to be very clear that we have maintained that initial $10 million principal on both funds and grown it as well. So, all right, now moving on to the hydro, onto the hydro reserve. So the hydro reserve funds came from the sale of the former Port Hope hydro utility. We have held those funds. There was some initial utilization of the funds, and then it's also been held in reserve. And there's been many different uses of the funds. Some years no spend, other years they've spent the earnings. But I have identified within the report the significant funding really has gone to the Town Park Rec Center when it was being built, the Capitol Theatre, the Mary J. Benson Library, healthcare in several forms, the Jack Burger Sports Complex renovation. It was instrumental in the business park and other economic development. That is also why the one standing direction on the hydro reserve is that as we were then selling land within the business park, because a lot of the hydro money went into it, then as those lots were sold, that money was put back into the hydro reserve as well. So currently there is $5.3 million in the hydro reserve. It is a reserve that was fully in place pre-amalgamation. So the minister's transition board order at time of amalgamation does apply to it, identifying that it was formerly a urban area reserve and therefore is to be used for the wording as the exclusive benefit of the urban area. As we've learned through the courts, the exclusive part is challenging in a larger community, which is why I have noted that the utilities, using it to offset costs in the utilities, which ultimately helps reduce our utility rates, certainly gives effect to that. But consideration can also be given to applying the funds to reduce, tax levy components. Obviously, as closely aligned to the urban area as possible. And so it does seem, so we have those funds there. This council is very well aware of the infrastructure funding shortfall and the challenges in and associated with that. And we're at a time right now that we are about to go into phase 3 of our Walton Street, our downtown full reconstruction project, which is obviously a significant milestone and significant cost for the community. And so, looking at that, if there's a want of council to utilize the reserve, mitigate, impact to the taxpayer at this time, it seems that such a significant, project, would be a meaningful time to do that. And then I also note, and I should, just generally for context, that in doing the first and second stages of Walton, we had saved up money from, our 2 largest provincial funding opportunities. And, we have used those through the first and second, phase. So we're now finding ourselves, right, with less other, areas to be able to draw from. We have phase 3 of Walton. And then following that, we'll be looking at Cavan, as a large project. And whether it's Cavan or another one, right, there's other, large, infrastructure projects as well. So given that situation, if council is interested in using the hydro reserve, have a recommendation tonight to direct staff to consider that in the funding. And I've identified the Walton project. The Walton project is approximately $4 million for phase 3, just to give you a bit of context. There's $5.3 million, sitting in the reserve. And that is an option. So it's not something that we don't need to do it, but it is an option. And based on, feedback and discussions at the last budget, wanted to bring that forward before you tonight for your consideration. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Director. Councillor Lass.
Okay. Don't want to comment on the hydro reserve. I think that's a brilliant idea. The only difference between urban and rural is the urban area has no stated intention to establish a policy to ensure how the funds are spent. So the urban area can spend their money whatever way they want. Sometimes it's gone to reducing levy, and sometimes we use it for the community improvement fund to bolster that up. So we have some discretion. The rural area does not have that discretion. And all I'm saying is perhaps we should find out if they would like to have that discretion. And yeah, it may cause some turmoil and dissension and some maybe positive feedback for a change. But I think we should go that step. They deserve that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lass. Any other questions or comments around the table? Yes, Councillor Todd.
So with the hydro reserve fund, let's say hypothetically, Walton, the cost is more. Let's say it comes out to 5.3 million, and we deplete it entirely. That just closes out the fund, and we're done with that one. Is that right?
I mean, it could. That ultimately that would come back to council as a council decision, right? We wouldn't set up to say use the hydro reserve till it's gone to finish Walton, right? We would set up a budget as we typically do. That would be, it would be associated with that. It wouldn't mean that we have to use $4 million, which is why I specifically haven't said we're going to use this and apply it to this and this and this, so that today is about opening the door. Do you want us to proceed in this general direction or not? And I know you're not questioning that. I'm just providing that context. It could be $4 million that we use. It could be $2 million that we use. It could be $4 million and hopefully not, but let's say, using your example, that it becomes 5.3 million to finish Walton for some unforeseen circumstance. That wouldn't mean that we couldn't then go and use Canada Community Building Fund or, some other reserve money that we have, and maintain, some remaining funds for some other, project.
Yeah, because net, what you're really saying to us is, regardless of the project, we would like to dip into that fund for infrastructure, right? Regardless of what it actually gets pinned to.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm not here before you saying I'd like to spend it. But hearing the concern, hearing, that we've done some significant increases to our capital funding, it's been very, very helpful, right? We also know that there's still a long road to go. And, we have, more large expenses, and they're not about to stop, in many ways. I mean, we're not going to keep doing the downtown every year, but there are other large capital, expenses as most communities, will experience. So the question, you know, I think is right now is whether, you know, we want to, you know, whether it's an appropriate time to take this step, and also does obviously, you know, provide some relief, you know, on the tax basis, as well, or not. I mean, arguably, you could do all of this and, you know, do a large, you know, infrastructure funding spend. I'm not recommending that, you know, but I mean, you could.
Right.
I think given what we're hearing, given where we're at, and I want to have the tax, you know, base lower, given that we were doing our downtown, you know, kind of marquee, you know, type capital project. If we're going to do this, it seems like it would be an appropriate time.
Right. And if not this, then the alternative is levy, or
in terms of funding for like Walton and Capital.
Yeah.
Yeah, it would be a combination of levy, and, you know, potentially using other, you know, grant money. You know, there are other options. I'm not here before you saying this is the only option. But
thank you.
Thank you, Director. I certainly think that just for, again, a reminder, can you just remind everybody what our infrastructure deficit is?
Approximately $9 million a year.
Okay, so that's not $9 million in total. That's $9 million a year.
That's correct.
So I really think that getting creative about how we can be raising the funds required for these pressing projects is really good. I'm very supportive of considering this pot of money to help offset the costs of what are just going to be continued projects, and continuing to think in creative and innovative ways of how to put together the packages of funding so that it's not coming just out of the levy. So thank you very much for bringing this forward. I think it's a terrific suggestion. Any other questions or comments around the table? Yes, Councillor Adam.
Thank you. I'm just going to make a quick comment on how wonderful this is. I think this is fantastic. I think you've done an incredible job, and we really appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, so we have a recommended action in front of us that the council directs staff to consider the use of hydro reserve funds as a funding source for the Walton Phase 3 reconstruction project. Can I get a mover and seconder for that? Moved by the Deputy Mayor, seconded by Councillor Adam. All in favor? And that is passed unanimously. Moving on to report 4.3, report DS 2524, re-sign variance 20 Jocelyn Street. Does staff have anything further that would like to add before we consider this report?
Good evening, Mayor and Councillors. I'm happy to speak to this item. Building Services received a building permit application for the 20 Jocelyn to remove and replace the signs on the building. The application was denied due to it being in contravention with the sign bylaw, which states a maximum of 1 sign per business per facade, up to 50% of the building facade area. Planning building staff are in support of this variance being approved. Due to that, they are not adding any new signs, and the percentage is well below 15% of the building facade. I'm happy to take any questions you might have.
Thank you for that. Any questions or comments from the council table on this one? Okay, the recommended action is in front of us. Can I get a mover and seconder for that? Moved by Councillor Less, seconded by Councillor Darrell. All in favor? And that is passed unanimously. At this point, we will recess until 8 p.m. Thank you. Okay, everyone, we will reconvene, and we're moving on to report 4.4, report PRC 1324, relocation of new Port Hope Pump Park. Does staff have anything further that they would like to add before we consider this report?
Thank you. Through the chair to council, we're asking council to direct staff to proceed with the installation of the Port Hope Pump Park at one of the following locations. Option 1 is Town Agricultural Park, and option 2 is Rapley Park. The background is that the municipality was successful to an Ontario Trillium Foundation capital grant in the amount of $200,000. This project is to be completed over 12 months. A pump park, for those who aren't aware, is a looped track designed for riders using bikes, scooters, or skateboards, even wheelchairs, to promote outdoor physical activity and social connection. Parks, Recreation, and Culture staff will work with residents on the design elements to determine the criteria for the site location and the specifics to populate the request for proposal. And we are recommending 2 locations that meet the criteria that can accommodate the anticipated design and size of the park. Open for any questions.
Thank you for that. Maybe I'll just start off. I know there's probably going to be lots of questions and comments from my councillor colleagues on this. Just your last point about the 2 locations. Do they also adhere to any specific timeline restraints that are associated with the grant that's been received by the municipality?
Yes, that's correct. So the project does have to be complete over 12 months. And so the locations would have to adhere to any PHAI considerations to ensure that the project can be complete during that period of time.
Okay, thank you. Turning it over to fellow councillors. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. And just to reiterate the comments I made offline during the break, I appreciate that this is an inherited file, so you know that you've picked up and are running with. So I just wanted to acknowledge that. I wanted to say I'm first of all really glad to see that this is moving forward. I think it's a great initiative, and I was really, supportive when, I think as we all were, when the community members first brought this to our attention. I have mixed feelings about the decision we're being asked to make this evening. And the reason for that is when this was brought to the council's attention, it was through a presentation by a group of community members who had been working on the concept for many years at that point, in part in sort of coordination with PRC, and then ultimately came to this council. And when we received that presentation, all of the talk at that time was about partnering with the municipality and the community members being involved in fundraising and essentially just looking for land and collaboration from the municipality. That does not seem to have been the process that has taken place since September 2023. I've had a number of discussions with the community members who proposed the pump track and brought the initiative forward. And the first being in the summer when I reached out just to say, hooray, we got the grant money. And the response from the community members at that point was, what grant money? We had no idea there had even been a proposal. So they were not engaged in the process. They were not consulted in the process of designing the proposal. They were not consulted or really engaged at all in the process of since then in sort of bringing forward these recommendations, and have expressed to me some concern that they have wasted their time over the years because they did do a full exercise of reviewing multiple locations and using a matrix that had been provided to them by the municipality, with parameters provided by the municipality, which said that Town Park was not on the table and where Rapley was never even mentioned. So they spent all this effort reviewing and really looking into these other options. And the 2 options we're being asked to look at were not even included in that community process. So my concern is partly from what are we missing? Because we have failed to engage with the community members who are users of pump tracks and who understand what pump track users are looking for and what's going to attract pump track users as visitors to our community once we have this asset. So that's sort of like the basis, I guess, for my concern. A couple of questions, though, specific to the locations to help me understand what we might be missing from what the community members have brought forward is a little bit more clarity on what were the criteria that were used to evaluate the proposed locations and ultimately to reject all of the other ones that are listed in the report, including the ones that were determined to be the preferred location by the community members who have been championing this initiative. And the second, it was really striking to me in looking at the list of locations that were considered, they were all in the urban area. And if we are going to put a resource like this at pretty much at anywhere in the extremes of our community, whether it's over on the west side or the east side, you know, the reality is that most people will be accessing it by car. Right? I'm throwing my kids' bikes in the back of the car and I'm driving them, whether I'm driving them to Town Park Recreation Center or Rapley Park. So given that, would staff be open to the consideration of a rural location such as Garden Hill, where there is a building and lights and parking and washrooms and access to a phone and first aid and potentially even other amenities like a shop and a place to grab a coffee and snacks as part of the consideration before we make a final decision.
Thank you for the background and some of that context. I appreciate it. I can speak to the first part of the question, and I'm going to pass it over to Director Snook for the last part. The criteria used was suggested by the Parks, Recreation and Culture Advisory Committee. That committee brought forward several criteria for staff to evaluate potential locations. They are listed in the report, but for a reminder, consideration of the demographics, locations where kids live and can get to, and a variety of ages, the importance of adequate parking, including existing and or the potential to add parking and the associated costs, existing or future trail connections, security needs related to vandalism, safety needs relating to potential for higher risk or injury, access to drinking water, washrooms, or shelter, and adequate lighting considerations related to parking and health and safety, and low impact of PHAI remediation requirements due to the nature of timing. Furthermore, staff supported those criteria and additionally looked at future planning and growth projections for the community, availability of destination access for out-of-town visitors, adequate space for the allocated design, and the ability to implement it in the required timeline.
Thank you, Eileen, for that aspect of the question. I think the context that you've put forward, Deputy Mayor, is good for awareness from a standpoint of staff. You know, if we would like to go through conversations of site specific today, staff are happy to do that. I think if I can premise that the methodology that has been used with Matrix, with what you referenced, was shared with the community group is a starting point for conversation. That methodology has been used by staff in a variety of amenities added in our community and has been very successful. From a perspective of how we got to where we are today, essentially any time that an amenity is available with grant funding or budget allocations through the department, we essentially look at all available parkland. So the first step, not noted in the report, is what is available and what are the impacts. So the context or the question related to rural areas were looked at. Majority of the results to come to this recommendation today are a result of other existing plans currently underway in parks across the municipality, including both urban and rural. Conversations related to also the type of use in these parks is a high consideration, mostly related to safety, access, inclusion, but also the protection of the asset. So Garden Hill was looked at. There are a number of factors that, again, due to the nature of the timeline to implement this project, there's not a specific space available at the Alex Crothers Park without reviewing the configuration of the ball diamonds at that park. So noting the timelines to be able to maintain the commitment through implementing the requirements for the Trillium Fund. The other largest factor from a staff review standpoint is the nature of this type of amenity in a rural area that's open is very high risk in the sense of impacts to that park from potential misuse from a motorized vehicle in an open park space. So it's a very high concern from staff through those types of conversations. The Canton Hub was looked at as well, noting through conversations today that there is a lot of work occurring with layout and uncertainty related to what will be available as far as open space at that facility once the configuration for playground and yard space needs to be allocated from a childcare standpoint. So again, related to the timing and the nature of this, those types of conversations review occurred to kind of narrow it down to a really close look at the 6 that were put forward. And the 2 that have resulted are also a result of similar contributing factors. I want to address the question or comment related to Town Park Recreation Center. And I agree in the sense from a community member perspective. The original initial conversation related to Town Park was an unawareness related to the property lines within that park. So you're familiar with the skate park. It's located on the northeastern part of the property. There is a tree line, excuse me. There's a tree line in that area. That is the property line. So there were initial conceptual conversations about could the pump park go on the other side of that tree line, and that is not our property. I think to highlight using the feedback from the community group, that it's unfortunate that those feelings are there. But I think if we can highlight that Town Park was reviewed by staff and the PRC advisory with these recommendations, because it was put forward as a recommendation, and being very creative in the sense of, unfortunately, you know, there would be some rearrangements of existing amenities, for example, the tarmac or the basketball area in the back. But identifying that, I think, is a very creative approach from staff using the feedback from the community interest group, that would be an area that they would like us to look at with the restrictions of the property concept. I think that addresses all your questions.
Thank you. And I know I'm going to go to Councillor Adam and then to Councillor Todd. Councillor Adam.
Thank you. I just want to make a quick comment on one of the things that you had said, where you had said that the group was not even aware of a grant that was applied for. So this is an email May 11th that I had sent to the group, where I did say about the grant situation. And as a municipal asset, all grants must come through the municipality. We were able to apply for an expression of an interest of MSLE grant, which we were not successful. So we decided to prioritize the project for Trillium. The application was submitted earlier this year, and the notification is still pending. We use the information that your group presented to the PRC and to Council as base, part of the intent of you giving us that information. If we are successful, we'll certainly be working with you and the community to design and develop. So I just wanted to clarify that they did know that this grant was coming.
Okay. I'm going to move on to Councillor Todd, and then I'll move to Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. And my question actually is around location as well. Space around Jack Burger near the high school and the other schools, was that a consideration?
Yeah, absolutely. I think from a Parks, Recreation and Culture Advisory standpoint, the excitement around Jack Burger and what the potentials are from a campus location, similar to the types of amenities that are being placed at Town Park Recreation Center, and the trail network in the north, that is excitement for future, noting that there are restrictions currently with the remediation in that area. That was the sole factor for not looking at Jack Burger.
There's not space to the west between the high school and Jack Burger. I appreciate, like, to the north it's being remediated. Is there? I don't know. That's a genuine question. I don't know that.
there is space from a consideration specifically to the remediation project, but there are other future aspirations for that parcel from a municipal standpoint.
Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, I just wanted to circle back. Thank you for that context, Councillor Adam. And I apologize, I've just made eye contact with the individuals in question, and they have searched through and confirmed that yes, in fact, there was that they did receive that email back in May. So apologies for that error. I did want to just to speak to that within the context of how things have played out in discussion in the last couple of days. And I think normally, you know, there's an effort is made to say connect with staff in advance of the meetings with some of these questions where we can have an opportunity for some clarity. Unfortunately, in this case, the meeting package was not live on Thursday as it usually is. It did not come out until late on Friday. We got the notice that the agenda was posted. And, you know, I'm a human being with other commitments. And that meant that the block of time I usually set aside for reviewing these packages so that I am prepared to have discussions in advance of council wasn't feasible because it wasn't posted yet. So I didn't get a chance to review this material till Monday, squeezing it in between multiple meetings. This is not about excuses. This is about the reality of what happens when we don't get the information public when we're supposed to. It makes it difficult for members of the public, including the community members who are sitting here this evening concerned about this issue, and those of us at the council table to do our jobs properly in advance of coming to these discussions in council chambers. So unfortunately, we're having a bit of an exchange here that would normally have taken place in preparation for coming into the meeting. But I did want to say that the feedback I was communicating was based on a conversation I had this afternoon with members of the community, and you know, I'm sorry I wasn't able to have those earlier, but did get my information directly from those community members who shared concerns.
Councillor Adam.
Thank you. So just to go back to locations, I don't know if everybody else is ready, but I'm ready to put forth that we accept option 1 at the town park agricultural, or the town agricultural park.
Thank you, Councillor Adam. But just before you do, I see that, yeah, I know you've got your hand on the button, so I'm going to turn it over to you. And I just want to make one other comment before but I appreciate you wanting to move on. Yes.
Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to add another thought in the sense of staff are certainly planning to and will continue to work with the members of the community that are interested, the Parks, Recreation and Culture Advisory Committee, the Youth Action Committee. The nice thing about this type of project is the community engagement into the design is the biggest part of the ability to receive that feedback and the input. So by identifying the location has the considerations for the broader, I understand it has that consideration for the broader impact of the park, but by meeting the criteria outset through the grant, but then also highlighting the really important part from a staff perspective is the engagement related to the design, and we're committed to be doing that.
I know that the CAO wants to speak, and I've just been waiting my turn to weigh in, and I want to just say that very much appreciate the explanation of the process. I appreciate Councillor Adam what you've added, the matrix, and you know, I'm very as in many instances have a lot of confidence in our staff and in our committees in terms of everything that's weighed into a decision. I also want to just focus on the fact that we were successful in an application. We got the grant, and I don't think that we've actually properly acknowledged that that is an amazing accomplishment by staff who are also often doing these grants as an additional workload on top of their other responsibilities as well. So I just want to acknowledge and thank you and to highlight the success of that, and that's a really positive thing for the community. Just wanted to bring that into the conversation. CAO.
Thank you, Mayor. And through you, I would like to circle back to the Deputy Mayor's comments in regards to her concerns with the Clerk's Department and the timing of the release of the agenda and how that inhibited the ability to review the agenda package and provide questions or feedback or appropriate timelines associated with the reports and the content of the agenda. So my recommendation would be to consider putting forward additional language in the procedural bylaw. As it currently states, the agenda needs to be put out to the public and to council 72 hours in advance of the meeting, and we met that criteria. I understand that time is needed, and respecting the time of our community members and council is always top of mind and is paramount to everyone on this side of the table. But the length of time it takes to prepare the information that is within the agenda, and sometimes not all information is available by Thursday at a certain time. We aspire to get it out on Thursdays when and if at all possible. Releasing it on the Friday is in no way a sign of disrespect or not respecting the time of council. And in no way do I want it to define or shape how we value and appreciate the hard work that goes into preparing the agenda, or that the Clerk's Department puts into ensuring that it is released. That said, if the 72-hour requirement is not enough for council to do a thorough review and to be able to provide appropriate heads up to staff members and provide the community the opportunity to provide questions, my recommendation would be to amend the procedural bylaw for beyond 72 hours, with the understanding then that you are squeezing the staff, and when you look at the schedule, how much time is in between each council meeting and the length of time that it takes to prepare some of these reports and peel back some of the onion. The LLRW and Hydro Reserve report tonight alone was hours and hours and hours. So I just felt I needed to support the staff, come back around and circle back around to that. Thank you.
Thank you. Is this I think maybe a final comment on this stream of thinking, and then let's move on to the two options on the table. Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, I thank you for that, CAO, and I appreciate that is the requirement per the procedural bylaw, but what it says in the procedural bylaw and what is our common and therefore expected practice, obviously in this case differ, because the entire time this council has been at this table, agendas have been published on Thursdays with some exceptions, right? So my comment was less about, I was able to do the work of preparing for the meeting. What I wasn't able to do, given the time crunch, was to give a heads up to Director Snook of the questions that I would be raising this evening or concerns. So it was more an apology that that's the piece that gets missed. So if there's less time, from my perspective, that's the piece that is going to be dropped. It's not going to be the time reading. It's not going to be the time engaging with community. It's going to be the time coordinating with staff so that you have a heads up and are able to then come prepared, right? And that was what happened this evening. So it was more a point of, acknowledging that Director Snook did not know that the concerns I'd be raising this evening. But I appreciate your feedback on that.
Thank you. And I do think that under those trying circumstances that Director Snook and staff did a great job in explaining and responding. So let's move on to the two options on the table. Councillor Adam had started to talk about one of the options, and so I think it would be wonderful to go around the table and hear from everybody. Councillor Darrell.
Looking at the two options with for the ones that are going to work for the criteria, I think town agricultural park is the way to go on this one. So many parts of it already in place. I think it just makes sense.
Councillor Less.
Yes, the one.
Councillor Todd.
So I am struggling a little bit. So appreciating the fact that we can't necessarily disclose what's going to go on the land over by Jack Burger, I'm finding it a little bit difficult to say yes to either of them, because holistically, what if it is the right spot based on what else could have been going there? So I do struggle a little bit on making a choice because we don't necessarily know the whole picture.
Just responding. Well, I think the director's going to respond to that. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you. So from a studies perspective related to the parcel that you're speaking to the west of Jack Burger, there are reviews related to the feasibility of the water tower being at that location and studies that are underway from staff.
Perfect. Thank you. Town Park sounds great.
Deputy Mayor.
So I'm struggling. I think, there's two things at play. One is what is the best option given the constraints and the parameters of what we're working with today. And the report is pretty clear which of these two options actually meets the criteria and is going to be feasible within the timeline. I do struggle with it though, because the constraints of this timeline we imposed on ourselves, because we moved forward with a proposal and got a grant, which is great, but a grant with a 12-month timeline before really doing the work around where this was going to go, including a process that was consulting with the community that is actually engaged and knowledgeable about this topic. So I appreciate it's gone through the advisory committee. I don't know if anyone on the advisory committee has even been to a pump track or let alone used one. So, I think we've backed ourselves into a corner because we put maybe the cart before the horse in terms of process and consultation around the recommendations for the location. That said, we have the money. There is a 12-month timeline, and within those constraints, I concur with the report and I concur with my colleagues that Town Park Recreation Center is the logical option.
Okay, any other questions or comments? I think maybe I'll just be an outlier and say, although I don't disagree with what folks have said, I'm struggling with everything seems to be focused on that one location, all the amenities and the distribution part of me was thinking maybe it would be nice to have something in a different part of our municipality instead of keeping stacking into one location. But having said that, I think Councillor Adam, you've got a motion on the table for the Town Park Recreation Center area. And do we have a seconder for that? Councillor Less. Any further discussion? All in favor? And that is passed. Thank you. Moving on to report 4.5, PRC 1424, Re 81 Mill Street South, Ganaraska Child Care Center lease. Does staff have anything further that they would like to add before we consider this report?
Thank you, Mayor. So the time has come. We're ready to work through the lease requirements for the property at 81 Mill Street South related to the daycare center. So the report outlines some general terms that we are currently negotiating with the child care service provider, Ganaraska Child Care Center. And so the report is seeking that council authorize the mayor and clerk to execute that agreement when it is ready to go. Reminder related to all of the legislative considerations for use of the space related to a child care center. Everything is governed through the Child Care and Early Years Act. The County of Northumberland is designated as the social service manager pursuant to that act. And the Ganaraska Child Care Center will be the service provider. So in August of 2023, Council authorized staff to complete the letter of intent and move through the establishment of the construction plans, the architectural work, and the construction on that site. And that is nearing completion, so we're ready to move through this process.
Thank you for this report. And just from the mayor's chair, I want to do a special thank you to the staff in Port Hope who has worked so diligently and above and beyond with the county staff on this particular project, as well as the other childcare spot in Canton. I know that you have been absolutely instrumental in ensuring that a process that started 2 years ago when I brought through county staff to the Ruth Clark Centre to look at the space for a potential childcare spot and was told, yes, perfect. We just need to do a few minor things to make it operational. Here we are 2 years later, and I know we're here because of the work of the staff and the troubleshooting of the CAO, and we're very grateful because we know we need those spots so desperately in this community. So a special thank you to you, Director. Any other comments or questions around the table regarding this? Councillor Todd.
Thank you. For this item, just make sure I'm reading it properly. The municipality will be responsible for utilities, and then it'll be reviewed in 2 years and see whether that gets rolled in. Yeah. And is there any indication that the county will be giving any money as we go through this process? Like, will they be contributing outside of the original build? Yeah.
So I can speak to that. So we've put forward the recommendation related to the lease, the square footage cost from a lease standpoint, where the municipality would cover the cost of utilities, and have established that as a good faith presentation to the service provider, in the sense that the facility's been closed since the pandemic started, so we don't have actual utility costs to use as an estimate. So we've written it as a 10-year term with a 2-year review of the lease rate for that purpose. It also allows the service provider to have that established 2 years to establish their business plan. From a ongoing funding perspective, from the county, there is a service agreement between the service provider and the county. So aside from the construction costs that have been established, there is a separate agreement for services through the county and the service provider that has no impact on the lease.
And will GCCC, are they moving from the high school into this, or is this an expansion?
This is an extension, so a secondary site, and the site will be named the Ganaraska Child Care Center Riverside Site.
That is very exciting.
Any other questions or comments from around the table on this? Okay, so the recommended action is listed on the agenda. Can I get a mover and seconder? Moved by Councillor Darrell, seconded by Councillor Adam. All in favor? Thank you very much. What a wonderful moment. Moving on to report 4.6, report PS 1524, property standards bylaw update, community engagement summary, next steps. Does staff have anything further they would like to add before we consider this report?
Thank you, Mayor and Council. As you know, in January of 2024, an updated draft of a property standards bylaw was presented to the Committee of the Whole for consideration. It was at that time the request was made by staff for further community engagement efforts to be undertaken, which will allow residents to review and comment on the amended bylaw, as well as a review of the bylaw by the Accessibility Environmental Advisory Committee and the ACO. As part of the community engagement strategy, a dedicated web page was created on myporthope.ca, which included a survey to engage our residents. The survey was promoted throughout the municipality through social media, posters, information boards, and video screens at our community centers. It was open from January to March of 2024. Those survey results and comments were reviewed along with the committee comments, which resulted in several further amendments to the proposed updated property standards bylaw. Community engagement strategy, which included the creation of a property standards bylaw updated webpage, had a total of 946 visits, with 62 people contributing to the survey comment form and over 200 people downloading a copy of the draft bylaw. Approximately 86% of those people who commented throughout the survey were residents of Ward 1, with 14% being from Ward 2. The proposed updated municipal property standards bylaw will ensure the minimum maintenance and occupancy standards for properties within our municipality. The additional updated provisions will ensure that those areas of concern can also be addressed by staff in an efficient and effective manner, and the requirements and obligations of the Property Standards Committee are in line with the the municipal committee bylaw, which is also being updated. Staff would also provide public notice in relation to the updated property standards bylaw through corporate communications. This is to provide adequate time for residents to become aware of the provisions of the new updated bylaw. So at this time, I'd also like to introduce our new supervisor of municipal law enforcement, Mr. David Chatwell, who can speak further to the updated bylaw, and we will be happy to take any questions you may have in relation to it. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and to the council. I'm very happy to be here. Had a good 4 days already. Well, actually 5. I almost have all the bylaws memorized. So please feel free to fire away. I was able to review the amendments and the report, so I feel quite confidently on speaking to any questions that you may have.
Thank you. And Mike, I say that's quite impressive in such a short period of time. I'm going to turn it over to council members for questions and comments. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. I'm speaking as a councillor, but in this case as chair of the Environmental Advisory Committee. We, as a committee, this was referred to the committee. The committee did provide pretty comprehensive feedback on elements of the bylaw that relate to primarily to yards. And I appreciate that some of those have been incorporated into the current draft. In looking at the current draft, I sort of noted that there were a number of recommendations that came from the committee's input that weren't incorporated. But rather than look at those as individuals, I think the question I had, and I have had this conversation with Officer Chatwell already, and I'm going to ask him to share with the rest of us sort of what he shared with me today, was really about, most of those revisions were really about getting to the crux of what the committee was looking for, which was to update the wording so that we are not just continuing to propagate the idea of monoculture grass lawns as the only acceptable or lawful, I guess, use of yard space in the community. And the concern being with the change that's been made is that it does make an allowance for alternative naturalized gardens, which can include pollinator gardens, rain gardens, biodiversity gardens and that. But the way it's expressed even in this updated draft sort of seems to set up lawns as the norm and these other things as being allowed at discretion, which is great, but they're not being treated equally as different options that are acceptable per the bylaw. And I'd like to ask Officer Chatwell to speak a little to how you intend, either through this bylaw or through other means, to address that balance of the risk of people just kind of leaving yards completely unkept, but also the risk of people not knowing that it is okay to do these other things that advance sustainability and sort of ecological goals in the community.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. The plan moving forward is to utilize property standards bylaw for larger properties, larger files, more expensive, extensive works. We'll also be utilizing it for tenant-landlord situations, but the plan would be to bring to council a clean yards bylaw as of December's council meeting, which will enable our department to enforce smaller matters, yard maintenance, refuse, slight drainage issues, water flow, those kind of things that currently under the property standards bylaw would take up to 19 days just to decide whether an order was deemed served or confirmed or not, also allowing for appeals time. So files for, say, cutting a small piece of grass or removing a couple boards of debris from a property can take up to 2 months while we're waiting for the Property Standards Committee to rule on whether our order was deemed legal or not. So moving forward, the procedure is going to be to utilize our Clean Yards bylaw, which will put in wording that will, I don't want to say, because a bylaw can't encourage the utilization of naturalized areas, but it will it will be more expansive to the idea that they are out there, just on the choices that we've used coming from the town of Stouffville. We had our clean yards bylaw that had easy wording for me to go and be able to step into a property, receive a complaint for, you know, a naturalized area, and go talk to the homeowner, get the background. And the individuals that have these places do extensive work and have extensive research, and took me to school on these items. So I know that they're for them, rather than going to a property where somebody's left something unkempt, and you walk in and you ask them the same questions that you asked the previous owner, and all their thing was, oh, I didn't have time, or, oh, I think it looks pretty. Well, you didn't do your research, so you clearly didn't care. And so it's finding through investigative means who's serious and who's just looking for loopholes.
Councillor Todd.
Right, thank you very much. So for clarification on the one that you're bringing back in December, so it'll touch on things like rain gardens, pollinator gardens, food gardens. Like, will it have that kind of depth to it?
Basically, it will, the wording that we'll use to describe what is allowed and not allowed, because it's one thing to list what is permissible. The one thing that you don't want is then all of a sudden I then have to define those types of gardens, and they have to meet these standards. Bylaws are there for us to be able to utilize in enforcement, right? And the issues that we can get into if we add in things like this is that we're pigeonholing ourselves to it, rather than going and allowing the officer to ask the homeowner or occupant questions regarding the gardens and getting the information and making the determination to be, okay, this person is serious, it is for environmental reasons, and then we can go back to the complainant and be like, this is a legitimate garden, and the complaint and investigation's over.
Right, thank you. So I have a few clarifying questions on the bylaw, and then also I wanted to draw attention, and this was sort of a late admission. The ACO had sent forward a letter. I don't know if you folks, did you get a chance to see it? Yeah. So one of the things that the ACO had recommended, and I just want to draw attention to it, was around the definition of heritage attributes, to include the elements, features, or building components that support or protect the heritage attributes, without which the heritage attributes may not be conserved, including but not limited to roofs, walls, floors, retaining walls, foundations, and structural systems. Is that a definition that we can incorporate? Is that a definition that we can consider?
It depends on the extent of what the municipality is willing to do work-wise, right? Because if we're going into issuing an order, we have to be willing to do the remedial work if the owner's not. And how expensive could that get for the municipality if we have to restore something or bring in utilities and stuff like that? That was something that council has to consider, the cost of the enforcement.
Is that the only alternative to enforcement? Is that we would go in and do the work, or is there other ways of doing that through, like have we seen other practices?
Under property standards, it's an order issued, then an order confirmed either by lack of appeal or by appeals committee. It then would go to Superior Court if they want to appeal again, and the final appeal heads over to Divisional Court. Once that order is confirmed, we're basically telling the owner, you have to do this work. And if they don't, we can charge them with a fail to comply with an order, hopes that we'll get a prohibition order on the property that the judge will then force them to do the work. Usually doesn't happen. So for expediency, the municipality goes in and does the work at our cost and then bills it back. It sits above the property tax. So yes, we would get paid first before they pay their own property tax. But it's how long that sits on the balance sheet until we get paid, looking at tax sales and stuff like that, and it gets into a whole mess of other stuff. But as far as remedial, the only hope we could get is we get a court order, to have the work done.
Thank you. And in the document, item 4.06, it says shipping containers shall only be utilized for the purposes of storage. Does that restrict us from using them for ARUs, seeing as more and more of these like shipping containers are an easy construction vehicle for ARUs? Would that stop us from that?
So in relation to the utilization of a shipping container for an ARU, it'd still have to meet the requirements under the Ontario Building Code. So a shipping container in itself doesn't meet the requirements under the Ontario Building Code. So therefore it wouldn't be defined as a shipping container because it would have to be modified and constructed to meet the requirements. So under the defined terms of shipping container, I think it wouldn't fall under that if it was being utilized as an ARU because then the provisions of the Ontario Building Code would apply.
So long as it's been modified appropriately, we would no longer consider it as a shipping term. Okay, great, thank you. Just want to make sure that we had that. In item 4.13 and throughout, we talk about the safety and security of the buildings, making sure that vacant buildings shall be kept clear of garbage and so on, and also shall have water, electrical, gas services turned off except for those services that are required for the security and maintenance. Does that sprinkler systems, stuff like that, do we leave those on for vacant buildings?
We do, so buildings that are equipped with a sprinkler system, we do not disconnect the water. The water has remained in place for the purpose of fire suppression.
Sorry, I have a few of these. And then in 4.16, we just want to make sure that when we're talking about boarding up buildings and so on, because it doesn't expressly say it, that we're still keeping all the legal fire exits and so on maintained at all times. There's another one later on that talks about we leave, for the main floor, but all the other floors are boarded up on vacant buildings. And in one case, we talk about fire escapes being raised and so on. If someone did get into the building and there was a fire, the provisions are there. I just want to make sure the language is there because I kept reading it over and over again. I just want to make sure that that was all available.
Well, the intent is to ensure that the building's secured adequately enough that no one can gain access. So that being said, fire exits and they aren't maintained because the building isn't being occupied. So we would be looking, the goal of the property standards bylaw is to keep people out other than providing safe access for them to egress. That's what the Ontario Fire Code is for, and that only applies to occupied buildings. So does that answer your question?
I think so. Yeah, I think what you're saying is the focus of this is to keep people out. Should people have gotten in, no, there's no consideration for that.
As I say, the plan is to make sure that the boards that are used are thick enough that they're certainly securely fastened, that nobody gets in there. The hope is the public would understand that a building boarded up will not allow them access if something were to go wrong and you're going in at your own choice, and that danger will ensue if you do.
Yeah, I guess, and I guess where a lot of my thinking is coming from is in light of the file factory, and certainly people do find their way into these buildings. And do we have the fire suppression systems in place? And do we have the proper exits and so on? Because appreciating the fact that the reality of life is we have people who will find their way into these buildings.
So yeah, so to answer your question, the goal is to keep people out. If someone was to enter the building, there's no requirement for maintenance of egress, for fire alarm systems, for any of those type of provisions under the fire code, which would apply to an occupied structure. So if you're undertaking breaking the law, trespassing, breaking into a building, then unfortunately there's risk associated with that. So the goal is to keep people out. That's why we've increased requirements for signage, for fencing, for hoarding, because that's what we want to see. We don't want to see anyone inside of these structures.
And do we have a provision to inspect annually or so on to make sure that they did keep the water, electrical on, so that so now I'm thinking Walton Street, there's a building that's vacant. The owner decides to turn the water off, a fire starts, we don't have a fire suppression system, or we don't have alarms going on, or whatever the case may be, and it spreads. Do we have some sort of system in place to inspect, or is that something that we should be looking at?
For the purposes of, we have a very fantastic relationship with our water departments. We're advised on a daily basis of hydrants that are being taken out of service or water disconnects that are in place. So anything where they would affect a building, generally buildings that are sprinklered or commercial or industrial in nature, so the fire service would be notified. We do not have a proactive inspection program in place, but we do have our officers who do conduct mobile patrols, and throughout the course of their duties recognize certain properties that have been deemed to be vacant or abandoned to ensure that they are adequately fenced or secured. And if they find them that they're not, then they'll contact the owners who have the legal responsibility to do so.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, any other questions or comments from around the table? Deputy Mayor?
I just wanted to circle back to the environmental considerations, and thank you so much for sharing that update. I'm really pleased to hear that there's going to be a different approach. I probably at that time will request that it get referred to the environmental committee so that they can provide some of the input that we had originally provided through this process. But while we're waiting for that, I do want to bring forward a slightly altered motion from the one proposed on the agenda. And I have cleared this. I've checked in with our new bylaw enforcement supervisor that this won't negatively impact his ability to enforce the bylaw, but just with a little nod to that idea that there are different approaches to yards that are not lawns, and that I'd like us to replace the word lawns in section 3.04 with yards. And I have some language from the clerk on that. Yeah, thank you.
So thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. So given the fact that there is currently no motion on the floor, I have some language here that encompasses what you have stated with the recommended action that was on the agenda. So if council is comfortable, I can read that out loud right now. That report PS 1524 be received, and that a bylaw be presented for council consideration to adopt an updated bylaw related to the administration and enforcement of property standards in the municipality of Port Hope, see attachment 1, with the following changes: that the word lawn be replaced with the word yard in section 3.04, and to repeal bylaw 69, 2006, and that staff be directed to provide public notice in relation to the updated property standards bylaw through corporate communications. Madam Deputy Mayor, so that the word lawn be replaced with the word yard in the last paragraph of section 3.04.
Okay, thank you. Does that reflect? Okay, can we get a seconder for that that motion? Councillor Adam, any further questions or comments on this? Seeing none, all in favor? And that is passed. Moving on, we've got no notice of motions on the agenda tonight. Moving on to item number 6, updates and new business. I have a few updates that I would like to share, starting with the File Factory. I wanted to provide an update on recent happenings at 121 Cabin Street on October the 21st. The Property Standards Committee met to hear an appeal on an order to remedy with respect to the cleanup following the fire at the File Factory. The committee considered evidence provided by bylaw officers as well as the legal counsel representing the owner of the property, who is the one that in fact filed the appeal. After deliberation, the Property Standards Committee voted to uphold the property standards order to remedy in full, and the owner of the property would have 20 days to clean up the property in accordance with the order that was issued by the municipality, subject to any further appeals. So that is the update on the File Factory. Second update I have is regarding a letter from the town of Cobourg that we received. We received correspondence from the town of Cobourg late last week related to their meeting held on October 10th, 2024, and their request to Port Hope Council to consider the concept of amalgamation and or expansion of policing with the municipality of Port Hope. I've spoken to the clerk regarding this matter, and it is my understanding that it will be elevated on November 5th, 2024 at our council meeting for further discussion by council. Another update, and this is regards to our budget survey. The last day for our budget survey is on the 24th of October. There's been an extension. The date that was on the website said the 21st, but it's actually closing on the 24th. I'm absolutely thrilled to announce that we are just shy of 1,300 responses to the budget survey, which I think is a historic first for the municipality. And I've asked the clerk, in fact, to give us more precise numbers on what the actual eligible voter numbers are in the entire municipality, to see if we've actually got or will get to 10% of all eligible voters on this survey. So I will be out again tomorrow morning just to do a final push. Hopefully we'll get a few more responses from today's outreach, but I wanted to thank all of council for coming out and helping disseminate this. Lots of very good informative discussions, great feedback on the budget, constructive comments on how we can improve. But I want to thank the staff for putting together a survey and starting a new trend around this. And hopefully with this response to the budget survey, people will develop a reflex for other surveys that we're going to be asking folks to do, including the next update around the procedural bylaw survey. So the municipality of Port Hope is also currently conducting its one-year review of the updated procedural bylaw, and we need your feedback. This bylaw outlines how council meetings are conducted to promote transparency, accountability, and efficiency in decision-making. 1 year after the updated bylaw was implemented, we are seeking community feedback to assess whether further refinements are needed. We encourage all residents to review the current procedural bylaw and share all of your comments and suggestions. I also want to note that the survey is not the only way that you can make your voice heard in regards to feedback. We invite you to contact council members, email your feedback to the clerk, or email any of us directly with your thoughts. Your input is always important in shaping the council's processes. I also want to remind everybody that when the report and any proposed changes are presented for our consideration, it will be at the committee of the whole, and the public will have the opportunity to participate in question period. They can also provide a deputation at the following council meeting. There are many ways that you, in fact, can share your thoughts, so please do. So the survey is now live, and to participate, please go to myporthope.ca/procedural-bylaw. So lots of surveys to engage in, and we thank you very much for your participation. Do any other council members have any updates that they would like to share this evening? Deputy Mayor.
Survey. I think this is going to be a record for the number of times we say the word survey in a single meeting. But I also have an update about a different survey, a community-led survey around Port Hope High School both as a community asset and looking at how community can better support the high school as a community asset, but also looking at the factors that are driving enrollment at the high school in preparation for sharing this information with the KPR District School Board, and in sort of complementing the efforts of Mayor Alana in advocating for the high school in the work that she's doing in directly with members, representatives from the board. So if you haven't seen it already, you can check it out on Facebook. Please feel free to contact me directly, and I'll make sure you get the link. It's been up for like less than 2 days, and we're already at well over 400 responses, which I think speaks to how interested the community is in our high school and the concerns that many community members have about enrollment and how we can ensure that it's a place all our kids get to go to high school. So check that out.
Thank you. Any other comments or any other updates that anybody would like to share? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to question period. It's now time for question period. Remember, question period is for questions only and an opportunity for members of the public to ask questions of council. Please keep your questions direct, and please note that this is not meant to be an avenue to ask questions to staff. If your question is specifically around a staff matter, we'd be happy to take your question, make sure that the appropriate staff person responds to you. And we please ask that you identify your name and address and press the purple button on the microphone. So please come forward.
Good evening, Mayor and council members. I'll try to make this as brief as I can. There is a huge issue arising with people who live on Walton Street. I would say west of Ross's Funeral Home. There is a number of homes there, and I'm sure most people don't realize that those homes are not single dwelling homes. A lot of them are apartments. Most of those homes have no on-site parking for them, and the only place where people can park is on the street. Now, myself, as well as I'd say 10 or 12 other people in that small stretch of road between Ross Funeral Home and Pine Street. There's a growing community there that are consistently being ticketed for parking. Consistently. There is no businesses west of Ross Funeral Home. It's all residential. There is no reason why people are being ticketed, and it's not even between our the bylaw where for snow removal. We're well out of the December 1st to March 15th time area. 3 weeks ago specifically, there seems to have been a blitz by police for parking. Number of our families that live in that area are elderly. Also, a number of them with small children. We are not able to walk 3-4 blocks to find an appropriate spot to park so that we can walk home. It's not feasible. It seems almost mean and thoughtless that those people in that specific area are consistently being ticketed when they have no other place to park. It is unfair to expect people to live in that area and not expect them to park. I have contacted the bylaw office on a few occasions over the past 5 years that I've lived there. In recent times, there has only been issues regarding parking within the December 1st and March 15th. However, in the past roughly 3 weeks ago, where there seems to have been a blitz going on, where people everywhere on that section of road has been ticketed. Also partially from there is no signage that doesn't say there is no parking. there is a sign on Pine Street and Walton indicating that there's no parking west of that road, but there's no sign saying there's no parking east of that road.
Okay, thank you. I just want to revert back and make sure we've got your name and your address. And also I just want to make sure that we sort of summarize into a specific question that we can then take forward and get an answer for you.
Okay, my name is Frank Rodriguez, and I live at 152 Walton Street.
Thank you.
I guess the question is, I have not only myself, but other members in that community have called the bylaw office. We've been rudely responded to and saying, that's just the bylaw. Parking's never been allowed there, which is ridiculous because most of us have lived there for well over 5 years and there's never been an issue parking. Why is there an issue parking there now? And if there is a bylaw stating there's no parking anywhere on Walton Street, why would that include residential part of? I understand not parking east where there's businesses, there's restaurants, I get that, but when it's solely residential and after 7 p.m. or 6 p.m. in the evening, Walton Street is a dead zone. Also, to include with the construction of Walton Street going on, there is a blockage, a road blockage at Walton Street and Pine, and on that sign specifically says local access only. That would be the residents that live there. So we have access, and it does say parking is allowed past that point, but yet we consistently get ticketed.
Okay, thank you very much for coming this evening. Thank you very much for your question, and we will make sure that you get a fulsome response to your question and to your concerns. We have taken note of your name and your address, and we will make sure you get a fulsome response.
I have spoken to your assistant at length, and she's aware of the situation that has been happening down there, and she also has my phone number. But I would like.
Terrific. As I said, we will make sure that you get a fulsome response from the appropriate staff to the questions and to the concerns. And I really appreciate you coming this evening to our council.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor.
Sorry, I think just some additional information to keep your eye out for, because I believe that the parking restrictions are part of the overall, the sort of a big traffic bylaw, comprehensive traffic bylaw. My understanding is that it's still intended to undergo a review in 2025. I'm not sure if that's still Q1 or if that's going to be coming later, but that might be something that you could consider with your neighbors of bringing forward your concern or request to a change to the terms of parking in that area as part of that process.
And just to clarify, so that we don't get into the nitty-gritty of not our lanes in terms of operations, we will make sure that you get the right, timely, and up-to-date information from the appropriate staff. Thank you. Okay, I will, as I stated, thank you. We will make sure that staff do return a fulsome response to your concerns and your question. Thank you again.
Chris Wallace, Walton Street, Property Standards Bylaw. Section 2, a very brief comment and then my questions. Section 2 is general provisions for all properties. Properties are defined in your bylaw as buildings, parts of buildings, and lands appurtenant thereto. Why does the bylaw deal just with the lands outside the building, which it does very thoroughly, and does absolutely nothing to protect the buildings themselves? Without protection of the buildings, we've got one obvious case of demolition by neglect, which has already happened. There's 2 other buildings that are subject to demolition by neglect as we speak. And this bylaw, why does this bylaw not address that? There are provisions for the protection of vacant heritage buildings. All of those provisions deal with keeping out trespassers. Nothing deals with the damage done by the weather, by the elements. There is reference to protection against the elements, but the subsections all go along with a long list of how to keep out the trespassers. Demolition by neglect usually is a matter of weather. Rain is incredibly damaging to wood structures and to masonry structures if they're not protected. Can't we have regular inspections, particularly of vacant heritage property, to see whether they are literally being left to rot, which they are right now?
Thank you for that. Thank you for that question. Normally, I would not ask staff to weigh in on it, but since we've got staff that we've been talking about the property standards, I don't know if there's anything immediate or if you would like to take this away and provide a more fulsome response to our constituent in writing.
I think just to address the comments made in relation to the structure in itself, there's, as you said, many detailed areas within the body of the bylaw that deals with both the exterior and interior requirements for property standards, including building construction, exterior facade, roof maintenance and condition. And then moving beyond that is the historical buildings as well that have now been added to provide our officers that additional tool in their tool belt. So it's my opinion that our current bylaw that was hopefully be passed in council will actually give us those additional tools to deal with some of the concerns that have been raised by not only this resident, but others as well.
Thank you. And we look forward to be able to provide you a more fulsome response to some of your concerns as well.
Yeah. May I respond briefly to that? Yes, there are provisions about maintaining, excuse me, structural integrity, but they're very, very weak. Those provisions are more or less the same on the new draft bylaw as on the old draft bylaw, the old bylaw in effect. It's never been enforced. Why was it never enforced in the file factory? Why was it never enforced in the 65 Ward Street? And why would we expect it to be enforced if the wording of the bylaw hasn't even changed?
No, and I appreciate your questions, Chris, and we'll definitely make sure we get something to you back to answer these questions. And certainly all of council has heard your concerns as well this evening.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions from the public?
Hi, Ed White, Mill Street. My question is on tourism. We're talking a lot lately about budgets and stuff like that. We've recently had the fish thing, and we had all kinds of people in town. Nobody carrying any bags, nobody buying anything. My question on tourism is, how do they determine where the tourism dollars are spent? Is there any surveys done on people that actually buy things that people want? It seems to me the last few weeks, people have been in town observing the fishing, and selfishly, as long as you owned a restaurant or something like that, you did fine. But I didn't see anybody wandering around with bags of purchases that they had made. Now, I obviously know that nobody's going to be coming on a bus to buy a washing machine, okay? Like, I get that, but I have more to offer than that. And the people that were coming in, I don't see what the target is on that, is where the tourism money is being spent. Is it all going to the Capitol Theater type thing? Like, I don't understand. I was just wondering if you could maybe have the tourism department get back to me and let me know what the target audience is, and what, you know, where the money's going, and what they actually do. Or do they do surveys out of town? Like, you know, that kind of thing.
No, thank you for that question. We had a little bit of an update last meeting around some of this, but I also know, and I'm looking at Councillor Todd on this, that I believe that there was going to be some kind of survey done, or some kind of outreach by the HBIA on the impact of the different fishing season that we've had in the community, and just I'm not sure how formal it was going to be, how the businesses were reporting on either changes of patterns or consumption or buying, etc. So I'm not sure where that went, but maybe if I could ask you to fill us in.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So the ask of the board, the HBIA, was to reach out to membership, and recognizing that it would be anecdotal evidence as to what happened, what didn't happen. Was there more people? Was there not more people? And also, no one's obligated to do it. Our next meeting's tomorrow. And so, you know, the idea is that we would try and get some sort of evidence from HBIA, but I think what you're searching for is, have we got any hard numbers on it that we can follow through on? And the answer would be no, there's not. It's a really hard thing to do right now, especially because Walton Street is been, you know, torn up. There's a natural dip going on in sales. So if I went to a merchant and said, what's the sales lift from, you know, the fishing and so on, how do you measure that against the fact that the Walton Street went down? So we are going to be relying on some anecdotal evidence for this.
Well, there was certainly
And if I could just answer, I think that also because that change happened quite quickly, the announcement came from the province quite quickly, that I think that should there be a similar system in place for next year, that it's definitely more of an opportunity for us to capitalize on the tourism that comes to town and have a little bit more lead time in preparation to see how we can be better engaging the public that does come here in buses and in droves, and get the local businesses really engaging with trying to maximize what they might have on offer that's either thematic or of interest to those folks coming to town. So I think there's definitely an opportunity in the future as well, but thank you for your question, and we'll get back to you on it.
Can I just ask, is this going to be discussed at the HBIA AGM? Or can it be brought up? Like, is there some way?
Yeah, I'm happy to raise that in tomorrow's meeting. I don't think they've completed the agenda for that yet, so I can't tell you if it is going to be brought up, but I can bring it up tomorrow with them.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any last questions? Yes, please.
Hey there. Brennan Bliss, 5974 7th line. I'd like to say thank you to everybody who has worked on this pump track park. Heather and I we're the ones who pitched it many years ago. We are thrilled that this is actually happening. To be honest, we didn't think it was going to happen. So thank you for all the work that everybody involved has gone with. We were just kind of discussing, I get the impression that there's going to be another vote to finalize the location in a couple of weeks. Is that correct?
Council will be ratifying the decisions of the Committee of the Whole.
Okay. I also kind of have your sort of feeling about, like, we're really localizing everything. Yes, that was our first pick. I understand that. But we also have a number of locations that Allie and Floyd from the town, we met with them yesterday, and Floyd took me through a number of locations that were never presented as an option. And to just throw into the town park right now, I feel like we have a little bit of room because I can't see too much happening, at least groundbreaking, before the new year. So I know it would extend everything a little bit, but maybe take a little more, another look at a couple possible locations, because from what I gather of talking with Allie and Floyd and a few other people who don't necessarily know much about what we're trying to build, most people, when you look to build a nice square lot like a park, we can work with that. We can, as building this kind of track, we can work with goofy shaped lots, off camber slopes, things like that, which most people look at and like, I don't want to build on that. That's going to be a problem. Where a few locations came up that would suit that type of build for something a little more unique.
So I'm going to just drill you down to ask a very specific question about what it is that you're asking us to do. And if it is specific other locations, just please articulate that in a question just so we have that for the record.
Okay. There's a stretch of land, like we thought the viaduct would have been a fantastic location. I understand that there's a few other landowners, which that won't work. Great. But right across from the daycare center on Mill Street, there's a little strip of land by the river. That could be awesome. It draws people right through downtown, as well, sort of looking at this track will bring in people around. That strip of land there's also where the old firefighters spot was, firefighters museum was. I understand the town is looking to sell some of that possibly, but maybe we could carve out a piece of land to put a pretty great park down on the waterfront. So there are a couple of locations that nothing was really going to happen with, in my opinion, in the next month or two. So,
well, thank you, and we'll definitely take those two possibilities in terms of your question to staff and get your response on it.
And just one last, more of a comment about the matrix that the town uses for site options. We filled it out, and I guess my problem with the site matrix is it's incredibly suggestive in like you can make it say whatever you want by how you feel what's adequate lighting. Like we weren't given that, you know, are there many trees? Well, what you consider a lot of trees might not be what I consider a lot of trees. So I gave it a 1, you gave it a 3. So it ranks higher for you, but less for me, but it's the same, you know? So I guess if we could have some clarity on maybe actual specific standards of what the adequate levels of the questions are, so that we actually, it's not subjective to my feelings on what adequate is compared to your.
Thank you for that feedback.
Yeah.
And we'll be certain to get you back an answer on the question embedded with the 2 suggestions. Thank you.
And we are thrilled. So thank you.
Can I ask you a question? Where are you on your fundraising?
Sorry, we are nowhere. We've reached out to, I guess, independently to different business about, you know, soliciting donations. But unless we had something that the town was actually on board with this moving forward, we kind of felt and seemed like grifters trying to shake people down for donations. So we didn't get far with it because we didn't really have, we were never given the go-ahead from the town that we could go out and solicit donations or even pledges for a donation. So we had asked staff that previously, we didn't get anywhere. And then there was a portion about fundraising that we had mentioned, and we were looking prior at what the skate park did for fundraising, and it didn't seem worth the effort. yes, it is good for community engagement, but a car wash and a magic show and a meat raffle, you know, we're fundraising, you know, $2,000. Well, we could go to a local business, ask them, and rather than tax our volunteers that are already putting time into this, now we're asking them to give up a Saturday to go and do, you know, a little, it's good for community engagement, but not actually for fundraising. So in my experience with decades of volunteering with different organizations, we have moved away from actual fundraising that way and go more just looking for donations and sponsors, because it taxes the volunteers of the programs more than the value we get in that style of fundraising. So that's where we are with fundraising.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. It looks like this concludes our business to be covered on today's agenda. And in the spirit of Bob Barker, please remember to have your pets spayed and neutered. And also, don't forget, we have just over a day left on the budget survey. So this concludes our committee of the whole meeting this evening, and I'm adjourning at 9:27 p.m. Thank you to everyone.